The Cincinnati Reds cannot afford to lose Nick Martinez.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Reds. My name is Jeff Carr, and I am a lifelong Cincinnati Reds fan. I've been hosting this daily podcast about your Cincinnati Reds for over 6 years now. I also manage the Locked On MLB channel for the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every single day, and here on Locked On Reds, we are your Reds every single day, all throughout the offseason, leading you in to what should be a playoff run here in 2025. Make sure you're subscribed so you get at least 30 minutes of Reds content in your feed every single day. And I'm glad that you're alongside me here today, because on today's Locked On Reds podcast, we're going to discuss the fact that the Reds will need to fill a lot of innings in the bullpen, but they already have someone ready to take over a big hole. I'll let you know who that is a little bit later on in the show. Also, if Nick Martinez does decline the qualifying offer, then I have a few ideas of how the Reds can try to replace him. But we will start first with why the Reds better hope Nick Martinez accepts that qualifying offer. That's all coming up in today's Locked On Reds podcast that is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Where we will begin today is with Nick Martinez. He has until November 19th at 4 p.m., so just a smidge over 7 days, a week from now, to decide whether or not he's going to accept the qualifying offer extended to him from the Cincinnati Reds. The qualifying offer is for a 1-year contract of just a smidge over $21 million. And while that seems like a lot of money, and there are some folks that I've seen say this, where they're just like, the Reds can't afford to have him pick that up, it feels like it's going to cripple them this offseason. They can't afford for him to decline that. There's a huge reason why. There's one number as to why. 142 innings. That's what the Reds will need to replace if Nick Martinez turns down the qualifying offer and goes and signs somewhere else, which would be the reason that he declines the offer. He's not going to decline the offer unless there's some report that he declines the offer but in tandem signs a multi-year deal with the Reds. He's declining the offer for a multi-year deal. And there's a good chance that that would be to another team, because I think the Reds offered him $21 million this year, knowing that they didn't want to make a long-term commitment to him. But the fact that they offered him the qualifying offer means that they understand they need Nick Martinez. Let's talk about exactly why. That 142 innings is a daunting number. There was only one pitcher on the team last year that pitched more than Nick Martinez did, and that was Hunter Green, the clear and far away ace of the staff, the best pitcher on the team by far, was the only guy that pitched more than Nick Martinez. We talk about Nick Martinez and what he did, especially in the second half of the season, taking over for a rotation that was battered beyond belief. What he did as if it was admirable, and I think we undersell that. Nick Martinez was the second best pitcher on this team, and I think that we have said that here on the podcast. Everydayers will know that Steve and I understand the value of Nick Martinez to this team, but I don't know that greater Reds country understands, because he came in as a relief pitcher and he became a starting pitcher. So there's a little bit of tendency to believe, well, he only did that because he had to, and we may not need to bet on that. But I would contend that if the Reds lost him, they'd have a hard time replacing him. We'll get into what they could do to try to do that if he were to leave here in a few minutes, but I want to focus on him specifically because actually the website that I love to use during the offseason, SpotTrack, SPOTRAC.com. They do all of the different financials and stuff for fans of every sport, not just baseball. But they have a list of free agents and what they made last year, what they did last year, and all that other stuff. And I think at some point during the offseason, they give you like a estimation of what they might make in their free agent deals, but that's beside the point. That's not what I'm talking about. What SpotTrack has listed for starting pitchers, nobody had more wins above replacement on the open market than Nick Martinez did last year. Last season, and there's some veteran pitchers who have been around for a while who are hitting the open market, and Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander, that everybody's going to say, well, their careers are better. Yes, I'm not saying that. I'm saying 2024, nobody on the free agent market was better than Nick Martinez was. So immediately he would enter the market with the most wins above replacement. That includes Corbin Burns. That includes a lot of different guys that are on that list. So it's worth noting that the Reds aren't just losing a solid player if he were to decline his qualifying offer. They're losing the best pitcher on the market, at least for this offseason's free agent class. So that's kind of got to be put out there just for the individual of Nick Martinez. But let's look at the Reds organization as a whole. They don't have an in-house replacement. If Nick Martinez were to leave, you could say, well, maybe Chase Byrne, maybe Chase Petty. I don't think either one of those guys are ready for opening day. So then you're looking at putting a guy in the rotation in like Carson Spires, who pitched last year, at times looked decent, but for the most part was not that great. Last year he had over a 5.5 ERA, or I think it was 5.3 ERA. Sorry, I'm getting a little hyperbolic there. But his ERA wasn't good. All of the numbers, we talk about sometimes when we talk about pitchers, we talk about fielding independent pitching. We talk about expected ERA, xFIP, expected fielding independent, all these different numbers that basically try to explain whether the ERA was lucky or unlucky. And all those numbers say that the ERA was right where it should be. So it's not as if Carson Spires was just getting a raw deal. He just wasn't that great. So I don't know that I would be so inclined to trust him on opening day. And then you kind of get the other arguments about, well, Carson, you've got some other guys, right? Connor Phillips, sorry, my brain was blanking on Connor. Connor Phillips is having an okay time out in Arizona. He's looking better. He's looking like he has better command of the strike zone. That's good. I want to see more of that before I hand him a starting rotation spot. You remember what he was like for the very little bit that he was in the major leagues in 2023? It was a roller coaster. And then in 2024, he lost his command. There is nobody in-house that I'm trusting with a starting rotation spot. So if Nick Martinez were to decline the qualifying offer, go somewhere else, the Reds would absolutely have to replace him. This is not a situation where next man up, we're in the middle of football season, so that's on the forefront of my brain. That's what every football coach says about any injury or anybody leaving or whatever it is. There's next man up. That doesn't quite work here because the next man up is not going to be ready for opening day. I think at some point next year, Chase Burns and Chase Petty have a good effect on the season. I think at some point next year we see Connor Phillips, and hopefully he has a great effect on the season. But I don't think it's on opening day. So whatever you do, if Nick Martinez isn't here, you have to go get somebody. And I really hope that he accepts the qualifying offer and stays. One other reason, too, just real quickly, that I hope that he accepts it is that where he's at in his career, he has had a very interesting career where he was in the majors for a bit, went to Japan for a bit, and then came back. And he's pitched really well ever since coming back. But he's 35 years old. So there's kind of a happy medium here where I don't want the Reds to give him a 4-year deal or something like that. But 1 to 2 years feels like the wheelhouse. And if he's not accepting 2-year offers and that's all he's getting from people, and he just accepts this $21 million qualifying offer, I love that. Steve and I always say, baseball money's made up. And quite frankly, to you, to me, we can't really understand that level of money. So the money to me, as long as it makes him a Red, that's fine. And I think that the Reds are still going to spend more beyond the $21 million. I don't know how much more, but I don't think this would be the only thing that they do. But my point is, really hope he accepts a qualifying offer, because if he were to decline it, the Reds could maybe apply that $21 million in a few different ways, and we'll look at what those few ways are coming up next. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Go to your next event with confidence, knowing that you got a great deal toward the beginning of the event, and you know exactly what you're getting into. They show you the all-in pricing. They show you your view from your seat. So even if you're going to a place that you've never been, Game Time can make you confident that you got the right spot. I mean, I'm talking football, basketball, hockey. You can buy baseball season tickets, I think, right now, or something like that at least. And you can check out theater shows, comedy events, concerts. All that great stuff can be found on Game Time. Get to your next event using the Game Time app. Download it today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB to save $20 off your first purchase. You're going to get great last-minute deals, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase with the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? It's Game Time. You are listening to some Reds talk here today, and we talk Reds all day, every week, every month, all year long. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Reds to get at least 30 minutes of Reds talk in your feed every single day. And we're talking about Nick Martinez, and let's pretend for a moment that what I don't want to happen happens, because I am in the camp. I want Nick Martinez to accept the qualifying offer. This pitching staff is better with him than it is without him. But how can they go along to kind of fix this? I don't for one second, and I know that there are people out there that will say this, but I don't for one second believe that if he turns down the qualifying offer, the Reds pocket that money. And that's all I really have to say about it. As far as, analytics go behind that and things like that, like, I just know. Like, I've seen people say that. I just know. I think that they will either give the $21 million to Nick Martinez, or they put $21 million toward bettering the team. Whatever the end money ends up, it's no less than $21 million, I would expect. So if you lose him, that money's on the table. And I find this kind of interesting because I don't believe that if he leaves, you then hand $21 million to an outfielder. And I know that Steve and I will discuss this a little bit more, but I know that we've talked a lot about this as the offseason has began, that the Reds absolutely need to improve their outfield. But they cannot ignore the pitching staff. And I almost wonder if they can't afford to outspend what they spend on pitching. Pitching is so important, and the Reds, they had one horrible run of luck when it came to health, where they lost everybody in their starting staff who they didn't trade at the deadline there in August. And it felt like forever that they went without any of the starting pitchers that were on their opening day roster. But with that being said, we know that there's no scenario where you can have too much pitching. And while quality is important, so is quantity. So with Nick Martinez, and for a moment, let's enter an alternate universe, which I hope is alternate and not this timeline. Hope it's a different timeline where the Reds have to do without Nick Martinez. To be clear, I want him on the Reds in this timeline. Let's pretend for a moment that doesn't happen, though. There are a couple of options out there. And let's pretend that that's the $21 million that they're applying to pitching in this case. The Reds could look at Sean Manaea, a guy that I thought that they should go after last year as well. He made a little bit over $13 million last year pitching for the Mets, and he pitched really well. It wasn't quite as good as Nick Martinez, but he threw more innings. He had 181 innings pitched last season. That was actually a career high, and that would be tops on the Reds if he were a Reds pitcher, because Hunter Green threw 150 innings. I mean, think about that. That's like 3, 4, 5 more starts on average that Sean Manaea made than even Hunter Green did. So that would be pretty cool. And based on what he made last year, and his age is comparable, I think he's 34, where Nick Martinez is 35. But based on what he made last year, I think that you might actually not have to spend all $21 million on Sean Manaea. But he would absolutely keep that rotation for the Reds stable if you were to get him. And again, this is options if the Reds don't have Nick Martinez in the fold. And Sean Manaea has a similar profile, more strikeouts, slightly more walks, but did a very good job at limiting hits last year. His walks plus hits per innings pitched were one of the best numbers of his career. In fact, last year, there's a good argument to be made, and we're not going to go crazy with it right now, but if you're really diving deep into Sean Manaea, there's a really good argument to be made that last year was the best year he ever had. So there's something to that where it's like, can we expect that again? What do we have here? Is this something that the Reds should invest in? If they don't have Nick Martinez, Sean Manaea should be the first call. There's another guy that I would at least kick the tires on if I were the Reds. If you can't get Sean Manaea, maybe look into Max Fried. But Max Fried might be too expensive here. So again, we're playing with the idea that it's $21 million that the Reds have to spend on pitching. And Max Fried is available. He's much younger. He's 30. He just turned 30. So you could even consider giving him a longer-term deal to maybe cut down the money and make it fit within the $21 million constraint. He did miss, and you're going to remember this, especially if you played fantasy baseball, but Max Fried missed a lot of time in 2023. But that doesn't make him injury-prone, because 3 of the last 4 years, he made at least 28 starts. Something that no Red has done for a few years since Luis Castillo spent a full year here. That's something that the Reds need. And for his entire career for Max Fried, he has 884 innings with a 3.07 ERA. For my money, I think he returns to Atlanta. But if there's no Nick Martinez, and if you don't get Sean Manaea, I would go look at Max Fried, because he would be an awesome option. Again, Fried, Manaea are really good dudes to bring in to the rotation to keep it stable without Nick Martinez in the fold. There's one other option, and I don't love this as much, but we could play this game where you get 2 for the price of 1, quote unquote. You use the $21 million to sign 2 pitchers instead of 1 guy. You get a relief pitcher and you get a starter. Now, the money may not work out on this, and it might cost more to get these 2 guys together, but both these guys made enough under $10 million to make me think that you could probably get both of them for $10 million each. And I'm looking at relief pitcher Tanner Scott, who had a fantastic year for Miami and then was traded to the San Diego Padres, had a fantastic second half of the season for them. And then starter Nick Pivetta, who has pitched for the Boston Red Sox for the majority of the last couple of years. Both those guys, if you put them together, Nick Pivetta would be a fine number 5, a fine back into the rotation type pitcher. He's not wowing you with the numbers. His numbers were not as good as Nick Martinez last year. In fact, I think Nick Pivetta had a 1.6 wins above replacement compared to Nick Martinez almost 4 wins above replacement. So big difference there. But Tanner Scott had a wins above replacement as a relief pitcher. Didn't make any starts whatsoever, but as a relief pitcher, he had a WAR of 3. That's fantastic for a relief pitcher. Meant that when he came in, other teams didn't hit for the majority of the time. And his numbers bear that out, as his ERA was under 2. Now, his last couple of years, he has been all right. His 2023 with Miami, he had an ERA of like 2.3. And then this past year, his ERA was under 2. So you kind of like that. That's a little bit of a pattern there. Previous years, he was a little bit more pedestrian. But relief pitching can be a fickle thing. So I kind of find it hard to invest too much in a guy. But this could be an easy dude to be like, you know what? Here's $10 million too. And again, I could be low on that. I could be low on Pivetta. This might be a little bit of underselling of both those guys. But theoretically, just kind of looking at the numbers and how they increase and how these guys were good, but one's a relief pitcher and the other guy's a starting pitcher who was not quite as good. He was above average, but he wasn't like good to be like, give me all your money. That could be the case. Definitely, I find the more attractive option of these 3 to be Sean Manaea, simply because I think there's far more competition to get Max Fried. He'll probably cost more than $21 million. And I like his quality over Nick Pivetta. And I think that the Reds bullpen is fine without adding, crazy talent to it. And I think this $21 million, And to kind of rehash this a little bit, I don't want to put this all in the outfield because I think that you really would cause Reds pitching to suffer. They don't have an in-house option to replace Nick Martinez. So you have to go outside to get him. You have to trade, free agent, something. If they lose Nick Martinez, he really, really needs to pick up that qualifying offer. Really does. But you know what? The Reds bullpen, let's switch gears a little bit. Nick Martinez needs to accept the qualifying offer for the rotation to be stable. The Reds bullpen may be bolstered by a pitcher who is in-house, and he reemerged during the second half of last year. You can tackle all the NFL action every single week over on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can get $5 because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And while you're there, you can look at next year's World Series odds. The Reds are 60-1 to win the 2025 World Series. Terry Francona says, hold my bear. Just saying, might be good to get in on the action right now. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Make sure to take us with you wherever you go, even if you can't watch on YouTube. We're literally on every audio podcast platform out there. All right, so one free agent, and we haven't talked about him a lot, and I was kind of digging into this a little bit more, and maybe we should mention this a little bit. The Reds lost Buck Farmer. He's going to be a free agent. I don't know if they bring him back. They might, but there's a really good chance he could get himself a multi-year deal somewhere. I don't know that it should be the Reds. So for a moment, let's pretend that Buck Farmer does not return for 2025. Tony Santillan is ready to step up. And he should be taken seriously because, quite honestly, he will be a valuable middle relief option for this bullpen next year. Last year, he really showed it, and it was all in the second half of last year. He only pitched 30 total innings. So we're not talking about a crazy sample size, but for relief pitchers, this is a pretty good sample. He had the second highest strikeout rate on the team to Fernando Cruz. And remember, Fernando Cruz was just elite at striking guys out. And he's one of those guys, it's so funny, just an aside on Fernando Cruz for a minute, because you can look at his numbers, and there are so many numbers that tell you that he's much better than what your eyes said. He is the perfect player that encapsulates the argument between, analytics and the eye test. Because we know what we saw, there were a lot of appearances where he struggled in, but the numbers say, for the most part, he should be in this bullpen on opening day. I wonder how that will go. And maybe part of it is David Bell just ran him into the ground in the first 2 months of the season. That could definitely be, and maybe through an offseason of healing up and getting healthy and ready to go, maybe he can return to form next year. But I digress. The point here being Tony Santillan was almost as good as Fernando Cruz at getting guys out via the strike. And he was also one of the top Reds pitchers in limiting walks. And as far as like any Reds relief pitcher that threw at least 30 innings, he was 7th on the team. So you had Nick Martinez threw a bunch of innings out of the bullpen. He was the best pitcher at limiting walks. Then Jacob Junis was right behind him. Brent Suter was right behind him. Those three guys were the triumvirate of limiting walks for the Reds bullpen. But Tony Santillan wasn't far behind. So those are the big two things. Whenever you're talking about relief pitching, I don't want to get too crazy about ERA. He had a nice tidy ERA last year, but ERA for relief pitchers can be very fickle. Strikeouts, walks, things they can control. Giving up home runs, he was pretty average when it came to giving up home runs. I wouldn't say that he was great at it, and that was probably the one thing that you worry about with Tony Santillan, but the strikeouts and the walks were fantastic. And because of that, his whip, his walks plus hits per innings pitched, basically the average number of base runners that a pitcher allows per inning, he had 1. His whip was exactly 1. A very nice, tidy round number for a statistic that rarely has round numbers. So I kind of love that. But I love this because he's going to help a lot with the perceived departure of Buck Farmer. Consider what Buck Farmer did for this team last year. You're probably, unless you're really plugged in to what the Reds did in 2024, you don't really understand the impact that Buck Farmer had. He led the team in relief innings pitched. He threw 69 relief innings for the entire season. Nobody else out of the bullpen pitched more. Now, we said Nick Martinez threw 142 innings. Many of that was as a starter, not as a reliever. So just out of the bullpen, nobody pitched more than Buck Farmer did. And a lot of that was due to multi-inning outings early on in the year when he was kind of pitching in garbage time. But through those performances, he showed David Bell he should be trusted more. And he did get a lot more high leverage outings and opportunities as the season went along. And only Sam Maul and Nick Martinez out of the bullpen had a better homer per 9 innings rate. So Buck Farmer was really good at limiting the home runs. But he was the guy. He wasn't the setup man. He wasn't the closer. He wasn't the bullpen ace. But he was the guy in the middle that you trust, that David Bell trusts. And I think that Tony Santillan will be the guy in the middle that Terry Francona can trust because of what he does. His fastball slider combination is elite. That slider is such a weapon for Tony Santillan because the fastball, he's pretty good at commanding it and he can kind of place it where he needs to. And then he gets the swings and misses on the slider, or at least misses a barrel and gets a ground ball. Tony Santillan is a guy that I really feel like he should fill the Buck Farmer role nicely next year. And this bullpen is interesting because I feel like coming into the offseason, our knee-jerk reaction was the Reds need another Alexis Diaz, or at least somebody who can contend for the bullpen ace role. Everydayers will remember we said something to that effect. And maybe even something to the effect that they could have a bullpen ace who they throw whenever they need to throw, and then Alexis Diaz could just become the 9th inning guy, and he just is remainder to the 9th inning. While that's a really great thing, and I think that if the Reds were to do that, they would be much closer to an A+ off season. I don't think they have to do that. This isn't like the starting pitching depth or the outfield conversation. It's more of a luxury than it is a need because the Reds have so many quality arms out in the bullpen already. And especially if you get a healthy and a reinvigorated Emilio Pagan, a guy that he kind of had a down year, dealt with a lot of injuries, especially after coming off a couple of good years in Minnesota. If you get him back, he could contend for that pitch him where you need to spot. You also have Sam Maul, who is an electric left-handed pitcher that really can get the out when you need him to. And you've got some other great pitchers in there as well. If Fernando Cruz can somehow figure out how to not walk as many people and not give up as many home runs, then he might become that bullpen ace because nobody struck out anybody more than Fernando Cruz struck out batters. So that's just how that went. But there's so many other guys in this bullpen that you can trust to. And they're going to get Ian Gibaut back. He's still under team control. Hopefully he'll be healthy. He was a solid relief guy when you needed him to be. And I trust this bullpen. If you were looking at position groups that you trust on this team, I trust the bullpen maybe the most. I mean, it's hard to trust him more than shortstop because Elly De La Cruz plays shortstop. And the starting rotation is very, very good at the top, but the depth of it makes me worried. It's very top heavy. So I think that the bullpen is right there, probably argument for the most trustworthy position group on the team. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes next year because Tony Santillan, he should be a big part of that. But I appreciate you so much for checking out today's Lockdown Reds podcast. That's where we're going to finish it up today. Look, Nick Martinez needs to accept the qualifying offer. Really hope he does. And if he doesn't, maybe that just means he got an amazing offer from somebody else. But The Reds need Nick Martinez. But that'll wrap up today's Locked On Reds podcast. Thank you so much for checking us out. Coming up on tomorrow's show, Steve will be back, and we'll be discussing some other offseason stuff, including the weird rumor about Paul Goldschmidt and why I don't see it at all. We'll discuss that on tomorrow's Locked On Reds podcast, so make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss that or anything else we've got coming for you this offseason. Lots more where that came from. If you missed our conversation with Tyler Gibbons, the current Cincinnati Reds scout from this past Friday, make sure you check that out. That was a lot of fun. A very informative conversation as well, because we will be with you all throughout the offseason, getting you ready for 2025 and what should be a playoff run. You know who else is here with you all offseason? Sully over at Locked On MLB. Go check out Locked On MLB right now. Actually have a link to it in the description of today's show, so you don't need to go searching for it. It is just like Locked On Reds, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every single day because you can trust that we will be Locked On Reds every single day.